To recap on the previous video, we spoke a little about the regulatory bodies that evaluate clinical trials which have been conducted on medications seeking approval for the market. We also spoke about the manner in which these trials are done and from whom they are financed. In addition to this, we highlighted the issue of missing data which industries are more than allowed to withhold and how this can lead to poor overall decisions being made by medical practitioners. In this video, which can be seen as a follow-on, I'll be looking deeper into psychiatric medication in general and antidepressants in particular. I'll briefly cover the prevailing theory of depression and of how these medications are said to work. I will follow this with some research into their efficacy. And I'll also be comparing it in terms of how they stack up in terms of efficacy against forms of psychotherapy. So let's begin with the fact that antidepressants are available from a medical professional who can prescribe them for a given purpose. So they've been deemed to be successful in combating depression through the mechanism which has been proved through clinical trials. So before looking at the mechanism offered in terms of how antidepressants work, I first want to offer two perspectives on how people see human behaviour. The first is reductionism. This can be defined as the belief that human behaviour can be explained by breaking it down into smaller component parts. So a person's feelings are just brain activity, So for example, if I identify the source of someone's depression as it being a chemical imbalance in the brain, that is an example of reductionism or biological reductionism. So my offer then would be, in order to cure that, I would need to interact with the chemicals in the brain, and by adjusting them to whatever kind of ratio is deemed healthy, then the depression should be gone. One of the main, if not the main, weakness with this line of inquiry is that it's basically just a matter of saying this is that. So depression is a chemical imbalance in the brain. It doesn't exactly explain why or how. How does electrical activity or chemical activity in physical brain translate into the subjective experience of isolation or loneliness or suicidal thinking. So it sounds like it's explaining everything, but it doesn't answer probably the most important things of why I feel like this. And as with any decent theory, there tends to be a counter. And the counter to this view is the approach known as holism, which offers that the whole is more important than the parts. Further, quote, a holistic approach therefore suggests that there are different levels of explanation and that at each level there are emergent properties that cannot be reduced to the one below. So you will have the chemical interactions in the brain, you will have the emotional interactions in the person's feeling, and you'll also have the behaviour in terms of how they act in the world. You can have these three things going on at the same time without reducing the action and the feeling, or the behaviour and the feeling, solely into the brain activity. They seem to kind of been going along at the same time. So now, having seen that there are two contrasting perspectives to human behaviour and experience, let us look at the common psychiatric mechanisms underlying the cause and treatment of depression. And I'll add in there anxiety as well, because they tend to kind of correlate a lot, but also you'll find similar explanations or arguments for the cause and the treatment of these. So according to the Mayo Clinic, quote, it's not known exactly what causes depression. As with many mental disorders, a variety of factors may be involved. And they list, number one, biological differences, namely that depression sufferers seem to have physical changes in their brains, and this may help to pinpoint the causes. Now, what they're doing there with the word causes is that they're assuming that the physical change in the brain leads to depression, as opposed to when someone suffers from depression, that can lead to the physical changes in the brain. So they're kind of putting a cause and effect in here, without explaining the alternative view of it. They go on, speaking of neurotransmitters, they are naturally occurring brain chemicals that likely play a role in depression. Recent research indicates that changes in the function and effect of these neurotransmitters and how they interact with neurocircuits involved in maintaining mood stability may play a significant role in depression and its treatment. Now, note the words likely and may. As stated earlier, it's not known exactly what causes depression. So again, because they reduce it to biological goings on like neurotransmitters or chemicals, they then take that as their starting point, seeing a reduction or an increase in these as leading to depression or leading to health or anxiety, instead of the other way around, flipping it and going, well, would someone with depression have lower levels of X? Continuing on, they list hormones. They state that changes in the body's balance of hormones may be involved in causing or triggering depression. Hormone changes can result with pregnancy and during the weeks or months after delivery as postpartum, and from thyroid problems, menopause, or a number of other conditions. So here they're kind of citing that a change in your hormones may lead on to depression. Or again, the flip side, if someone is depressed, is inherited traits. With depression is more common in people whose blood relatives also have this condition. Researchers are trying to find genes that may be involved in causing depression. So the obvious argument against this is if you have parents who are depressed, they might be living lives or have lifestyles that will lead to depression. They may have poor diet, they may have poor discipline, they may have a poor outlook on the world, they may have a poor social structure, they may have poor supports. So if they have children, then they're going to bring that child up in that atmosphere, that the very atmosphere that helped create depression in the parent. It's just naturally probably going to create depression in the child as well. The American Psychiatric Association, or the website psychiatry.org, they also list risk factors for depression. They cover some of the same ground as the Mayo Clinic, and biochemistry, genetics, but they list as well personality. So they state that people with low self-esteem, who are easily overwhelmed by stress, or who are generally pessimistic appear to be more likely to experience depression. They couple that then with environmental factors. Quote, continuous exposure to violence, neglect, abuse, or poverty may make some people more vulnerable to depression. Now, this is just it's very weak, and it shows the perspective on the world and on people that psychiatrists take, or at least some psychiatrists take, in that they see people as the brain activity, so that you just have, and that's why, instead of going into why someone would have low self-esteem or why they would be easily overwhelmed by stress. And also exposure to violence, neglect, abuse, or poverty. When do they start tracking that? What and why does that make some people more vulnerable to depression? Are they tracking the environmental factors as starting from the womb, or are they starting it from birth? These are the psychodynamics involved here of how a person experiences these things. How does someone experience neglect, or why does this person experience this as abuse, and why does another person not seem to succumb to a similar kind of environment? These are all really, really interesting questions, and they serve to kind of flesh out a human being in totality. They make a one-dimensional issue, which is the biological reductionism of assuming that a person's just their brain activity or the chemistry in their brain. If we fix that, problem sorted. The other approach, the holistic approach of looking at the totality of someone's experience of their environment, their social influence, what they aspire to be, their desires, their emotions, their dreams, along with their hereditary, who their ancestors were, where they're from, all these things. That's a much more fulfilling and fleshed out and three-dimensional real world view of the human being. And ultimately you could argue it's more fruitful. And ultimately, in terms of causes, the short end of it is that they don't know. Psychiatrists that don't know what causes it. Again, it falls back on the problem of the reductionism being this is that, this is equal to that. It doesn't answer the question of how these things cause depression or something else or another feeling, and why, and ultimately the two courses for cure or treatment that they offer are medication and also psychotherapy. So on medication, the APA or the American Psychiatric Association state that brain chemistry may contribute to an individual's depression and may factor into their treatment. For this reason, antidepressants might be prescribed to help modify one's brain chemistry. Again, may, and might, which isn't a problem. Like, if you don't know, like, it's probably best not to come out and make massive declarative statements if you're unsure or if you're kind of 90% certain, so it's not a fault, but it's just important for people to realize that they're unsure. Like psychiatrists, the bodies of psychiatrists in America and elsewhere, they're unsure, they're not 100% certain. So it's important for someone going to a doctor or a psychiatrist with depression to know that, that they're not entirely certain. So you don't have to take everything they say to you as gospel, In terms of psychotherapy, they offer CBT as the main branch of psychotherapy that helps with depression. And they state, quote, CBT is a form of therapy focused on the present and problem solving. CBT helps a person to recognize distorted thinking and then change behaviors and thinking. So again, CBT is the psychotherapist extension of not medication, but the reduction of something to another thing. So CBT will often assume, or largely assume, that the problems that you're facing are down to the way you're thinking and the way you're viewing a thing, which is reducing issues or problems that you're suffering from. It's reducing it to your thinking. So if you can change the thinking, all else is good, which sounds reasonable, but for a large percentage of issues in the world, especially the most extreme things, changing your thinking or shifting your thinking isn't possible for periods of time with people. It might be from moment to moment, but you're putting yourself under enormous amounts of pressure if you're kind of forcing yourself or kind of trying to command yourself to alter and change your thinking minute by minute if there's something extremely bothersome to you. If your environment is toxic, if something horrendous happens to you, like sexual abuse or seeing someone being killed or close suicide or whatever, sometimes even the death of a pet, some of these things need to be felt through, as opposed to kind of changing your thinking around them, which has its place, but not for everything. Sometimes feelings can be more dominant, or you need to focus on feelings more than thinking. But the problem is that by reducing everything to your thinking, the sole focus of CBT becomes on one's thinking. All else stemming from that, as opposed to shifting between that. Let's offer equal weight to your feelings, to your wishes, to your desires, to your imagination, to your thinking as well, to your feelings, to your action, and to your past too, and to the future, So how do antidepressants work? They work by increasing levels of a group of chemicals in the brain. These are known as neurotransmitters. In turn, by playing with the chemicals, reducing or inhibiting, you're altering the depression or the anxiety. Now, back to the Mayo Clinic. And in this regard, they state that, quote, some neurotransmitters such as serotonin or noradrenaline can improve mood and emotion, although this process isn't fully understood. They continue on stating that antidepressants can treat the symptoms of depression, but they don't always address its causes. It's a good point. They're usually used with therapy to treat severe depression or other mental health conditions caused by emotional distress. Now, the most common forms of antidepressants are known as SSRI, which are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. And SSRIs treat depression by increasing levels of serotonin in the brain. Serotonin is one of the chemical messengers, they're neurotransmitters, that carry signals between the brain's nerve cells or neurons. SSRIs block the reabsorption, that's the reuptake of serotonin into neurons. This makes more serotonin available to improve transmission of messages between neurons. SSRIs are called selective because they mainly affect serotonin, not other neurotransmitters. And finally, SSRIs may also be used to treat conditions other than depression, such as anxiety disorders. So again, you can see by using the chemicals as the root or the primary cause of depression or of X, by getting in there and working with that, you're then altering or changing the whole lot. So the serotonin thing is pretty kind of common. It's almost kind of universally accepted amongst the public. Even like if you talk to anybody that has depression or knows someone with depression, they'll probably be able to state the whole idea that people that suffer with lower levels of serotonin have depression, and antidepressants tend to increase that. So it's kind of commonly known, but there's evidence to suggest that this isn't the case. There's been studies done where people who are depressed or have been depressed but didn't take antidepressants, they've been shown to have normal levels of serotonin in them. So but so what, you'd argue, like they still work. Who cares what levels they're affecting in what part of the body, as long as they're working. And this just begs the question, is like, do antidepressants work? And what do they mean by work? Again, I'll go back to the whole idea of the missing data, that industries, they don't have to publish everything that they conduct. So there could be massive amounts of research and trials out there that demonstrate that not only do antidepressants have zero effect, they also might have a serious negative effect. And Kirsch is one researcher, and he kind of pulled apart all of the research that was available, and he also went through the Freedom of Information Act and got a lot of the stuff that's been given to the FDA for approval. He got a lot of that research, and when he boiled it all down, he found that there's like a minuscule difference between the effects of placebo and the effects of medication. And this could be boiled down to the fact that if you're depressed, one of the worst feelings, or one of the main feelings involved with depression, is a feeling of helplessness or hopelessness and hopelessness. So the fact of getting up out of bed, if you can manage that much, and getting yourself to a doctor and talking to the doctor a little while about what's going on with you and how you're feeling, and then being given something that you're told is going to help you with this, that's huge. You can't discount that fact that I'm coming from a place where I feel like I can't do anything or things aren't going to get better, and then to act in the world as if you're trying to make them things better or trying to make your life better. That act alone is probably going to ensure positive effects in the time coming after that. Whether they'll carry on, of course, will depend entirely on the person, on what the person does. But you could attribute some of the benefits, or even the idea of placebo, you could attribute that to the person acting in a manner that is going to better their life. And regardless of how this process works, I don't want to try and reduce it again to anything in particular, but the idea of getting up and doing something for yourself could be challenging your belief around the thing. The idea that you can't do anything, because your beliefs impact on your expectations of a situation, and your expectations tend to determine how you act, which then fall back into or feed back into your beliefs around it as well. So if you believe that there's no hope, you're going to expect nothing to change. If you expect nothing to change, you're probably not going to act in a manner which will facilitate that change or which will create that change. And then because you haven't done anything, nothing has changed, which feeds back into the belief that nothing's going to change, or that you're hopeless or helpless. So the idea of getting yourself up and going in whatever way that is, it could be going out for a walk, or going out and talking to a friend. It might not have to be going to a doctor and getting medication. It could be the process that is beneficial as opposed to the end result. So far we're unsure of what causes depression. We have an idea around why or how antidepressants work, or what they do to change things, and also the idea of them actually working or doing what they say they can do. That's called into question as well. So what about the pitfalls of taking them or medication? We know that long-term users of benzodiazepines and anti-anxiety medication, a lot of them tend to suffer from severe symptoms including depression and general anxiety. And you could say, well, of course, so that's why they're on the medication. But you see that when people try to withdraw from these medications, the withdrawing of them create the very symptoms that the medication is prescribed for in the first place. And also with antidepressants, long-term use could result in effects that people don't necessarily want. Symptoms of withdrawals, suicidality, weight gain, addiction, and an important one as well is the feeling of not being yourself. Kind of being a little bit cloudy or a little bit zombie-like. And a lot of the time this is only captured by people or spoken of by people once they've come off the medication for a while. While they're in it, it tends to be a little bit harder to recognize it yourself. And this is due to the neurological side of it. Antidepressants, they tend to impact on a part of the brain that is linked heavily with self-reference, the precuneus. And you can see how this would be a problem. So if taking medication leads to a bit of a distance between yourself and yourself, essentially, you can see how this could be said to have worked. So what is the purpose of antidepressants? To alleviate feelings that are consistent with depression, sure, but also in doing that, it might also take away your ability to feel more positive or more joyous emotions. You see what I'm saying? So the ability to self-reference, or to kind of look back on yourself and ask yourself, how am I feeling? I'm feeling this because of whatever. I'm just feeling okay. It takes away that. So it kind of stifles the inner dialogue a little bit. And also, I was reading another interesting thing as well, because naturally leading on from that then, and kind of maybe explaining some of the links between antidepressants and suicidal behavior, and also homicidal behavior or aggression and violence, is if your ability to self-reference or to look back on yourself, observe yourself even, is minimized, then your empathy is lacking for yourself, number one, but also it naturally leads that it'll be lacking for other people as well. And there's research that published last year, and they've been shown that tends to be the case. Again, small little study, but logically it makes sense. And again, the argument continues to roll on. There's in 2018 there seemed to be the knockout kind of blow showing the efficacy of antidepressants in treating or alleviating symptoms of depression. But then the following year there was a counter to that, showing some of the flaws in how they conducted the research, etc. So the argument continues to rage on, and I'll put them down below for people to read. It's because they're worth reading, They are worth reading. And the argument will continue to roll on, So next we can look at, in terms of treatment, they offer medication and CBT or psychotherapy. So next we look at that. And CBT has been found to work just as well as antidepressants at alleviating symptoms of depression. And particularly in chronic or really severe depression, CBT along with a medication, has been proven to kind of work more effectively. And again, if you add in the idea that, because some people might be a little bit hesitant about believing that counselling or therapy can do any good. It's like, well, you're just sitting around talking. What does it do? Tell me how it works. It's pretty hard to explain how it works, other than the fact of like being listened to, or having some attention given to you, and having feeling care probably for the first time in a long time. That alone can have massive curative effects or helping effects, But then if you couple that with the fact that you're taking a scientifically backed and validated medication from a doctor or a psychiatrist that, as far as you know, has been proven and shown to work against the very thing you're suffering from, the two of them together it has been shown that they work very well to pull you out of a slump or to help you get cope for a while as you kind of naturally come out of a depression that you're in. As a lot of people do, a lot of people just naturally come out of it. And I suppose a lot of the time it's just about holding a person, keeping them alive, and sometimes just allowing a process to unfold in itself, because people naturally, your body naturally, your mind, your psyche, your soul, and naturally try and care for itself and to cleanse itself and regroup and put itself back together again, but sometimes someone's environment might not be a desirable environment for that to occur, so sometimes medicating them is enough to kind of keep them alive for a while, but again, you're adding in the risk factors of medication as well, which are underreported as far as I'm concerned. So CBT as well, I would offer in there different approaches as well. Again, there's arguments for CBT and psychodynamic or different kinds of therapy, but ultimately CBT, it's not more effective, it's just been researched a lot more, It's just been researched a lot more than the other approaches. So they all seem to, when they are kind of researched together or when they're shown side by side, case by case, they do tend to kind of do the same thing, or they do tend to work. And again, there could be massive arguments made between the core ideas or the core principles involved in CBT and a more kind of analytical or psychoanalytical approach to psychotherapy. These are massive arguments, and I'll leave that for another day anyway. And I suppose the reason why I wanted to do this video is because if you just take the view that depression is a result of chemical imbalance in your brain, you can see it as just something that happens to you, Like, so you could be going along in life fine, each area of your life you're kind of happy enough with, and then bang, it might just hit you. Whilst it might look like that on the surface, like that, it sounds peculiar, that a feeling of hopelessness or disillusionment with the world or suffering or unhappiness in your own self or in your own experience, that just comes all of a sudden out of nowhere, when all evidence might be that you were happy beforehand, or you did feel like you enjoyed yourself and you enjoyed your surroundings. So a counter to that then is should always be offered, because it gives back responsibility, and also it gives back power to people, that if we look at it as not just something that happens to you, as a kind of an accumulation of lack or an accumulation of excess of certain things that aren't good for your well-being, like constantly being run down by someone in your life, or being in a group of friends that are kind of constantly ridiculing each other but never really backing each other up or building each other up, or being in a family that's just a disaster, constantly nitpicking at each other, just constantly berating each other, always running each other down, always complaining, never asking you anything about yourself, never being interested in you. Like, these things have massive, massive effects on people's minds and on their emotions, you know, and how they view themselves, which is fundamental, you know, to anything. How you view yourself. And a lot of the time, you need to be nurtured in a way that allows you to go out and take risks, so that you get to understand yourself from your own actions and the consequences that come from them, you know. You then develop your own understanding of what your abilities are, and your self-esteem grows from that. But if you don't have a supporting network or a supporting environment, it's far harder to take them risks. Because number one, you know, if you fail, you're going to be ridiculed for it, you know, and you'd probably just never try again. Which goes against the whole drive in a human being of going out there and following one's own interests, you know. So again, back to the responsibility as well. You see a lot of people, and they take wholesale the idea that depression is just an illness that can come out of nowhere, and it's a problem that needs to be fixed with a chemical influence. You know, they'll take that and they'll accept that because it gets them off the hook. You know, if you're terrible parents and you've created a horrible environment for your children, and your children grow up and they become depressed as a result of that, you're off the hook if you can point at this as just saying, well, it's a chemical problem, you know. It's got nothing to do with what I've done as a parent or what I haven't done as a parent. You know, it's not necessarily my responsibility and I'm at no fault. If anything, it's hard on me because my child now has depression, and they may kill themselves as a result of that. But none of that is my fault or responsibility, you know. Whereas if you take a more holistic view of it, and you do allocate some blame and responsibility to one's environment, to their parents, to how their parents were, you know, not who their parents are, but how they were, how they treated you, how they made you feel about yourself. Because ultimately you'll choose your friends as a result of that as well. Like, if your parents make you feel good and respected and confident, you're not going to accept that treatment largely from other people, you know. So you'll hold yourself in a certain manner which will attract certain types of people to you, good and bad, you know. But the difference being that you won't accept the bad as freely as someone who's been used to that will, you know. So the environment, your upbringing, nature as well, you know. What are your interactions like with the world? You know, when you walk out your front door, are you met with cars? Are you met with noise? Are you met with loads of people that you don't know walking past you? Don't really chat with many people. Or are you met with the sound of a crow? You know? Are you met with a kind of nature's silence, you know? That bustling with noise, but yet there's nothing interfering or impacting on your senses too much, you know. There's a quietness there. And the beautiful thing about this quietness is, without realizing it, it forces you to reflect on yourself. By just walking through any kind of natural environment, you're dancing with yourself, you know. You're interacting with yourself. You're being a good companion, and you're being a support and a friend for yourself, because you're in dialogue with yourself, you know. You're thinking of what you're feeling, what you're seeing, what you're smelling, what you're hearing. You know, these things are all adding together and giving you an experience that is solely yours, you know. Whereas if you're constantly bombarded with technology and a sensory overload, you know, from the noise of cars, the noise of people around, even if you're walking, you're on your phone, you're listening to music, all these kinds of things, like that stifles the inner dialogue. It stops you from having conversations with yourself and getting to know yourself. So when you block that off for so long, the deeper aspect of yourself is crying out to be heard. So ultimately it screams out in massive anxiety, and if that's not listened to, then it will just shut down and it'll force you to listen to it, which is what depression does, you know. And it's what it is as well. By being depressed, it forces you to spend time with yourself. It forces you to acknowledge some of the suffering that you would have denied or been oblivious to, because you're overly stimulated with things, you know. And the problem, it's a massive problem in this age, is because there's so many things there to entertain ourselves with, we are no longer entertaining ourselves with ourselves, you know, or even other people, you know, which can be a problem as well if you're kind of throw yourself into the grips of always needing to be around people and doing something to be stimulated or to feel good, you know. So that's why I wanted to do this and highlight this, is it's for others to notice these things and to accept that it's a multi-factor thing adding to someone's depression, you know. So you can see those things, note those things, and then offer options to a friend if you see they're kind of getting a little bit jaded with things, or they're kind of not seeing them as much as you used to, you know. You can see some of these things and be like, they haven't been out talking to us in a while. I wonder what's going on with them. Maybe we'll go and meet up with them, you know. Or maybe we'll get them out of the house for a while and we'll go off for a walk, or we'll do whatever, you know. Because that's the idea of just allowing it to be a mental illness or an illness in itself. It kind of shoves someone into an isolation, you know, by going, well, this is a problem that you alone need to go and fix by going to a doctor and getting medication, you know. And as well, how many people do you know that are on antidepressants or anti-anxiety tablets that are also seeing a therapist, you know? Should they all be seeing therapists? Or should we be the therapists, you know? And that's what my point is that by kind of knowing that there's loads of things involved in leading to a depression, we can step in and act in some of them manners, you know. We can be the good company. We can be the mirror to reflect back onto someone. We can go for a walk, you know. We can kind of put the technology aside and go and do something aesthetic, you know, or do something sporty, or even walking and class it as a sporty, you know, using your body, you know, just spending time with others and with yourself, as opposed to being distracted and having your energy pulled out of yourself, you know. And also, if parents could have a look at their shortcomings and have a look at the disasters that we are in our own lives to a certain degree, in certain areas anyway, we're all a disaster in at least one aspect, and we're always trying to overcome them things, you know. But it's important to acknowledge these things, so we're not handing these on, or we're not causing others to suffer as a result of our own lack, you know. So ultimately, I believe that depression, viewed better in a more three-dimensional manner, a more human manner, is a family thing. It's a psychological thing. It's a societal thing. It's a community thing, you know. And we're all responsible, you know. So just kind of pawning someone off and saying, well, look after the doctor with you now and you'll get that sorted, while you're not trying to change anything in your environment for that person, that's not fair and that's not right, and it's not helpful, you know. So I was going to focus on Ireland in this one, but I'm going to do that again in a different video altogether.